There exists a particular kind of awareness that, once awakened, cannot be put back to sleep. Have you ever experienced that moment when suddenly the veils of ordinary perception part, and you find yourself seeing through the carefully constructed facades of our social reality? It's as if you've been handed a pair of special glasses that reveal what lies beneath the surface of our interactions, our institutions, our very culture itself. This heightened perception arrives like an unexpected gift, opening dimensions of understanding that most cannot access. Yet over time, you may have discovered the shadow side of this gift, the way it slowly begins to erode your ability to participate in collective agreements that make social life possible. As Jean Piaget might have recognized, this process mirrors how children develop cognitively, moving through stages of increasingly sophisticated understanding that both empower and challenge them. The gift of seeing too much follows a similar pattern, beginning with exhilaration at new insights, followed by the painful recognition that once certain truths are perceived, you can never return to the comfort of not knowing. Consider how it begins so innocently. Perhaps you notice inconsistencies in what someone says versus what their body language communicates. Or you sense underlying motivations in group dynamics that others seem blind to. These small awakenings feel like superpowers at first, allowing you to navigate the world with greater discernment and clarity. You might even feel a sense of pride in your ability to perceive what others miss, to understand the deeper currents running beneath ordinary interactions. This mirrors what Piaget observed in cognitive development. As children move from simple, concrete understandings to more nuanced and abstract thinking. Just as a child feels empowered when they first grasp a complex concept, the initially awakened individual experiences a rush of expansion and possibility, with each new level perception that opens. But what happens when the seeing continues to deepen, when the aperture perception widens beyond what is comfortable or easily integrated? The gift begins to reveal its cost. You find yourself at social gatherings, hearing not just the words being spoken, but the unacknowledged fears, desires, and unconscious patterns driving the conversation. You see how people perform versions of themselves they don't even recognize as performances. You notice how institutions that claim to serve human flourishing often perpetuate the very problems they claim to solve. And most disturbing of all, you begin to see these same patterns within yourself, the ways you too have been unconsciously shaped by forces you never chose to be influenced by. This scene becomes relentless, involuntary, impossible to switch off even when you desperately wish for the comfort of not knowing. This experience aligns with what Piaget called cognitive disequilibrium, that uncomfortable state that occurs when new information cannot be easily fitted into our existing mental frameworks. He observed that when children encounter information that challenges their current understanding, they experience a kind of cognitive discomfort that motivates them to either assimilate the new information by fitting it into existing mental structures, or accommodate by changing those structures to incorporate the new reality. The person who sees too much exists in a near constant state of disequilibrium, continually forced to revise their understanding of reality as deeper layers of truth reveal themselves. While most people's cognitive frameworks are designed to create stability and coherence, the frameworks of the deeply perceptive person are constantly being dissolved and reconstructed, creating an exhausting inner experience that few can understand from the outside. I want to pause here and ask you directly, has there been a moment in your life when you suddenly saw through something that others around you couldn't or wouldn't see? How did that awareness change you? What was it like to hold that perception while others remained unaware? If you feel called to share, leave a comment below with the words, "I saw through," and complete that thought with your experience. Your story may be exactly what another person needs to read today to feel less alone in their own journey of difficult perception. I read every comment, and your experiences are valuable not just to me, but to our entire community of sensitive perceivers navigating a world that often prefers comfortable illusions to uncomfortable truths. The destruction that comes from seeing too much begins internally, as a kind of erosion of the protective barriers most people maintain between themselves and the raw truth of existence. Piaget spoke of schemas, those mental frameworks we develop to organize and interpret information. For most people, these schemas filter experience in ways that maintain psychological comfort and social belonging. But for those who see too much, these filtering mechanisms become increasingly transparent, leaving them exposed to aspects of reality that others are naturally shielded from. It's like developing an allergy to the artifice that makes social life sustainable for most people. You can no longer tolerate the small hypocrisies, the convenient self-deceptions, the collective agreements to focus on certain aspects of reality while ignoring others. What most experience as normal social functioning, you experience as a kind of mass delusion that you can neither participate in convincingly nor explain to those still comfortably within it. This is where the internal destruction begins to manifest externally, affecting your relationships and social connections. You may find yourself increasingly unable to engage in the small talk and social rituals that once came naturally. Conversations that most find unremarkable become almost physically painful in their superficiality or unconsciousness. You may be perceived as judgmental, overthinking, or unnecessarily serious when you're simply responding to what you actually perceive rather than what you're supposed to perceive. Like the child in Piaget's concrete operational stage trying to communicate with adults operating from formal operational thinking. The gap in perception creates a fundamental disconnection. Except in this case, you're the one operating from a more complex perceptual framework than those around you, and the burden of translation falls on you if connection is to be maintained. This disconnection can lead to profound isolation, not the isolation of physical solitude, which can often be restorative, but the more painful isolation of being perceptually alone even when physically surrounded by others. You begin to recognize how much of human connection is based on shared perceptual frameworks, on seeing the world in basically the same way. When your perception has evolved beyond certain collective agreements, you find yourself increasingly unable to share your actual experience with others. If you try, you may be met with confusion, defensiveness, or concern about your mental well-being. This creates a painful choice. Speak your truth and risk rejection and misunderstanding, or hide your perceptions and experience the internal dissonance of living inauthentically. This pattern of isolation, followed by the search for authentic connection, mirrors another aspect of Piaget's work on cognitive development. He observed that as children move through developmental stages, they often experience periods of withdrawal and reorganization before re-engaging with their environment from a more advanced cognitive position. Similarly, those who see too much often go through periods of retreat from social engagement, not out of rejection of others, but as a necessary space for integrating and making sense of their perceptions before finding ways to re-engage authentically. This withdrawal is not permanent, but serves an important developmental function, allowing for the consolidation of new understanding before attempting to translate it into forms that can be shared with others. The internal destruction reaches its peak when you begin to recognize that there is no end point to this seeing, no final revelation after which everything stabilizes into a new, more accurate understanding of reality. Instead, each new level of perception reveals yet another layer of complexity, another dimension of truth that further dissolves your existing frameworks. Like Piaget's formal operational stage, which doesn't represent the end of cognitive development, but rather the beginning of more sophisticated forms of thinking, expanded perception opens a door to ever-deepening levels of awareness with no clear culmination. This can create a vertigo-like effect, a sense that there is no solid ground of understanding to stand on, only increasingly subtle and complex patterns of relationship and meaning that continually evolve as your perception deepens. In this phase, many who see too much experience a kind of spiritual or existential crisis. The frameworks that once gave life meaning and direction have been seen through, recognized as constructs rather than absolute truths. Yet the need for meaning and direction remains. This is where the gift hidden within the destruction begins to reveal itself. Through the painful process of having your perceptual frameworks repeatedly dissolved, you develop a new relationship with knowing itself. Rather than seeking final answers or absolute truths, you learn to hold understanding more lightly, to see it as provisional, contextual, evolving. You develop what Piaget might call a metacognitive awareness, an ability to reflect not just on what you know, but on how you know, on the very processes through which understanding is constructed and reconstructed. This shift represents a profound developmental leap. Instead of being imprisoned by your perceptions, you begin to work consciously with the very process of perception itself. You recognize how your awareness both reveals and creates the reality you experience. This doesn't mean falling into radical relativism where nothing can be known or all perspectives are equally valid. Rather, it means developing a more sophisticated relationship with knowing, one that acknowledges both the partial truth in multiple perspectives and the practical necessity of making distinctions and judgments while navigating a complex world. This is similar to how Piaget described the development of formal operational thinking, which allows individuals to think about thinking itself, to reason about reasoning, to consider not just what is but what could be. This more fluid relationship with knowledge allows for a kind of rebirth after the destruction caused by seeing too much. Instead of being overwhelmed by the complexity you perceive, you begin to develop the capacity to navigate it with greater skill and resilience. You learn to translate between different perceptual frameworks, to communicate across the gaps in understanding that once felt unbridgeable. You develop what might be called cognitive empathy, an ability to understand how others make sense of their experience even when their frameworks differ significantly from your own. This doesn't mean pretending to see the world as they do, but rather developing capacity to move between different ways of seeing, to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without losing your own center of perception. This capacity for cognitive flexibility and integration parallels what Piaget observed in advanced cognitive development. As individuals master formal operational thinking, they become capable of more complex forms of reasoning that can accommodate contradictions, uncertainties, and multiple valid perspectives. Similarly, those who have navigated the destruction that comes from seeing too much often develop a more nuanced relationship with contradiction and uncertainty. They become comfortable with the provisional nature of understanding, with the recognition that truth is often contextual rather than absolute, revealed through multiple perspectives rather than any single definitive viewpoint. This doesn't mean abandoning the pursuit of truth, but rather pursuing it with greater awareness of the complex relationship between the perceiver and the perceived. The process of rebuilding after this destruction involves creating new ways of making meaning that can accommodate the complexity you perceive without being overwhelmed by it. This might involve developing spiritual or philosophical frameworks that acknowledge both the constructed nature of human understanding and the possibility of connecting with dimensions of reality that transcend our constructions. It might involve finding or creating communities of others who share similar perceptual capacities, spaces where the full range of your perception can be expressed and received without the need for constant translation or self-censorship. It might involve developing creative outlets that allow you to communicate your perceptions in forms that can bypass the limitations of ordinary language and connect directly with others at a deeper level of understanding. Throughout this challenging journey, It's essential to develop compassion, both for yourself and for those whose perception differs from yours. Just as Piaget recognized that cognitive development unfolds according to its own timing and cannot be artificially accelerated, the evolution perception follows its own organic timeline that varies from person to person. The fact that you see what others don't doesn't make you superior or them inferior. It simply reflects different positions in an unfolding process of developing awareness. Your role isn't to force others to see what you see, but to honor the truth of your own perception while creating conditions that support the natural evolution of consciousness in yourself and others. If these words have resonated with something deep within you, if they put language to experiences you've struggled to articulate, I invite you to join our community of perceptive souls walking this challenging but beautiful path together. By subscribing to this channel, you're connecting not just with content, but with a gathering of kindred spirits who understand the gifts and challenges of seeing beyond the surface of our shared reality. Each video is created as an offering to those navigating the sometimes difficult terrain of expanded awareness, providing perspectives and insights that might serve as signposts on your unique journey. This isn't about building numbers or metrics. It's about nurturing a field of consciousness where the full spectrum of human perception can be honored and explored together. The gift of seeing too much does indeed contain the seeds of a certain kind of destruction, a necessary dismantling of limited frameworks that create space for more expansive forms of understanding and being. The process isn't easy or comfortable, but it serves an essential function in the evolution of consciousness. What begins as personal perception eventually contributes to collective awareness, as insights that once seemed radical or impossible to communicate gradually find their way into shared understanding. This is how human consciousness evolves. Not all at once, but through the courageous perception of individuals willing to see beyond established boundaries and find ways to translate their seeing into forms that can be shared and integrated by others. In the end, the gift of seeing too much is not about escaping the human experience, but about embracing it more fully, with greater awareness of both its constructed nature and the deeper dimensions of reality that inform these constructions. It's about recognizing, as Piaget did in his research on cognitive development, that our understanding of the world is not given to us complete, but is built through our interactions with our environment and with each other. The person who sees too much takes responsibility for this construction, consciously choosing which perceptions to develop and how to engage with them rather than passively accepting perceptual frameworks inherited from their culture and upbringing. This is both the burden and the blessing of expanded awareness, the opportunity to participate more consciously in the ongoing creation of human understanding. As we continue to navigate this path together, remember that the destruction that comes from seeing too much is not an endpoint but a transition, a necessary phase in the development of more integrated and comprehensive forms of awareness. The disorientation and isolation you may experience are not failures or wrong turns, but important aspects of a developmental process that's unfolding as it should. By honoring the truth of your perception while maintaining compassion for yourself and others, you create conditions for this process to unfold in ways that serve not just your individual growth, but our collective evolution. In this way, what appears as destruction reveals itself as transformation, the necessary dissolution of limited frameworks to make space for more expansive possibilities of perception and understanding.